Good morning. So what is an artist doing speaking at a convening like this? I'm going to share some lessons. I have two goals this morning. I want to help you reconsider political extremism, and I want to have you leave here with a bit of hope. So I'm going to take you through a quick romp where you'll encounter 4 lessons and see 3 of my different art series. Just last month, just a second. We've got it. Just last month on Pennsylvania Avenue, I installed this exhibition called Alienable Right to Life. Now, that phrase comes from the Declaration of Independence, which you see here in the background. In the foreground, you see a massive American flag. That flag is created from the names of over 1,000 victims of mass shootings. Beginning with Columbine. These are people who were killed in high schools, in secondary and elementary schools, in places of worship, while shopping, and even at a 4th of July parade. People from California, Maine, New York, Florida, and many other states came and found the names of their loved ones on this flag. On the side of this art, I presented a poem. Hold on. I presented a poem that I created from the preamble to the Constitution. Now, one of those stanzas is this: let us create a more perfect union secured through balanced rights. I'm talking about how we need to balance the right to life with the right to carry arms. And of course, this was right in the view of Congress, where many of us will be tomorrow. Now, to provide visitors a chance to participate, I also had a mural, a cylindrical mural. Now, you're looking at this and you're saying, Suzanne, there's a problem with the flag. Some people actually came up to me and said, is it actually allowed to present the flag upside down? And I explained to them that the US Code for presentation of the flag does allow for this in times of significant distress, imminent danger. Of course, midway through my 11-day exhibition, what happens? What news breaks? Yes, thank you, Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito. So after that, people started asking me, is this a Stop the Steal art exhibit? You can't win. You just can't win. On the interior of the mural, we invited people to add their names of their loved ones whom they had lost to any type of gun violence. And you can see here, this little guy wrote his cousin's name. His cousin was killed when he was 13. On the exterior of the mural, we invited people to add their stories of gun violence or their thoughts about access to guns in America. Now, yes, I have brought, thanks to American Promise, part of this mural is outside in the corridor. Now, yes, I've turned it right side up, or actually upside down, and I'm inviting you to add your responses to it, to the prompt. If I had a magic wand, I would. So I look forward to hearing or reading your responses to that. One of my favorite visitors to this art installation was a card-carrying, lifelong, dues-paying member of the NRA, Mr. Chisholm from Kentucky. He came in hot. But I explained to him, Mr. Chisholm, I went to high school in Lexington, Kentucky. So his demeanor softened a bit. But he still asked me, so you want to get rid of all guns? I didn't say a word. I took out my phone. I showed him a photo that my sister had just sent me of her front yard there in Wyoming, taken just a few days prior. Anybody know what those brown things are? That was a grizzly bear. Mr. Chisholm didn't say a word. He went and he added his message to the art. I would like red flag laws to get guns out of the hands of potentially irresponsible gun owners. Once he saw me as a person, not a political stance, once he saw me as a person with a nuanced view, it gave him the space to have a nuanced view as well. So 6-year-old Wren, when her dad wasn't looking, she wrote her own message. Beatrice from Scotland came, and she added her message. She said, "The first thing my mom said to me when I said I want to go to the USA is, please don't get shot." Now, this was a sentiment that was voiced by several parents. I met the parents of an Australian grad student who is here studying at the University of North Carolina. She said, "Oh, yeah, my parents were worried. And guess what? The first week I was there was an active shooter." Right? This was a view that was expressed over and over again by many visitors from over 20 countries, complete and utter amazement at our gun policies. So, yes, that was one thing that they said over and over again. But another thing was this. They said, we're afraid. We're afraid about what's going to happen in November. We came to visit now because we don't want to be around in the US this November or afterwards. And some of them even asked me, they said, "Suzanne, are you afraid?" That was a gut punch. That leads me up to lesson number 1. The world is watching. Now, this first became evident to me in the fall of 2020 when I installed In America, How Could This Happen? An art installation that I created because the pandemic deaths had grown so large as to be incomprehensible. The number was just too large, so it was easy to dismiss. As a visual artist, I felt compelled to physically manifest the loss from the pandemic. So, in a 4-acre oval outside of RFK Stadium in DC, with a lot of help, I planted over 250,000 flags, each one honoring a person in the United States who had died from COVID-19. Now, what else was happening in the fall of 2020? A presidential election, thank you. The foreign press descended on Washington, D.C., and they found my flags. Images of this art were found in Der Spiegel and Telemundo, on an Arabian Airlines magazine. But my most notable press interaction during this whole exhibition was with a seasoned correspondent from the Japanese version of 60 Minutes. After the interview, his camera crew was packing up, and I saw him standing off to the side. And so I walked up to him and just stood there quietly. And finally he said to me, "You know, Suzanne, as a teenager in Tokyo, I loved everything about the United States. I loved the fashion, I loved the fun, I loved the music, oh man, the Beach Boys." But he said, "I've carried that part of me with me every single day of my life. And seeing this, it just crushes me." So that leads us to a corollary. Yes, the world is watching. What happens here matters. And it matters in ways that we might not even understand. So as Brian mentioned, I did bring that art to the National Mall, the greatest stage in America. In the fall of 2021, with the help of a lot of people, we blanketed 20 acres of the mall. Now this art was it was large-scale data visualization. It was a chance for individuals to mourn their loved ones lost. During this art exhibition, over 20,000 flags were dedicated to loved ones. Those flags are now at my studio. They've been archived. There was a moment for our nation to pause and to reflect. Now, I named this art In America, remember? Because I green-lighted it in February of 21, and vaccines were going into arms, remember? The death toll was plummeting. So I named it In America, remember, so that in September, when it was exhibited, we would be reflecting back on those we lost. Well, I was wrong. Oh, okay, I'm gonna try to go back here. Hold on. Okay. The first red dot is when I greenlighted the project. This is daily death toll. You can see it plummeting. What happened several months later? Delta variant and vaccine, the virus it just skyrocketed, especially in places where disinformation and vaccine refusal were rampant. In fact, Kaiser Health determined that about 75% of the deaths that happened in this fall were in the sub-vaccinated or the unvaccinated. So I, with this art installation, began with 666,000 flags, as Brian mentioned. Over the course of just 17 days, this art exhibition increased to 701,000. I had to add approximately 2,000 flags per day. So I'm going to tell you, after this art exhibition, I was exhausted. I just had to understand how people could be willing to to ignore science and risk their lives and those of the others around them. The answer materialized for me as I was studying science denial. In their book, Denying to the Grave, Drs. Jack and Sarah Gorman note that when a person encounters information that supports their ideological or political beliefs, whether left or right, it triggers a dopamine surge in their brains. This is the same thing that happens in drug addiction when a person encounters their drug of choice. So I began to wonder, could there be something about addiction here? Looking at the definition of addiction, the broad definition is this. It's a compulsive consumption of a substance or a behavior despite harm to self or others. So, behavior, The Cleveland Clinic notes that behavioral addictions can occur with any activity that's capable of stimulating your brain's reward system. Remember that phrase, brain's reward system. Now, gambling is already considered a behavioral addiction, and many other behavioral addictions are being studied, researched, including membership in cults. Cultism is being studied as an addiction as well. How do we diagnose addiction? Sorry, I'm fighting with this a little bit. Okay, here we go. Symptoms. Symptoms can include an intense focus on an activity or a subject, inability to stop the behavior, or increased tolerance. Tolerance is when the body gets so used to that chemical chain reaction triggered by a substance or a behavior that it needs more and more and more of it to reach the same physiologic effect. Researchers in Berlin, Toronto, and Stockholm, when they were studying a group of people who had high circulating dopamine levels in their brains, they found that they were more likely to adopt unfounded beliefs. This is the same thing as conspiracy theories. So, now we have an idea. Tolerance could explain how our loved ones who are intelligent and sane can somehow reach the point where they believe that George W. Bush knew 9/11 was going to happen, think that an entire political party is composed of satanic pedophiles, think that Bill Gates actually had the time and inclination to infuse COVID vaccines with microchips, right? Some individuals at the political extremes may actually be suffering from an addiction to this behavior. Now, this idea gives me some clarity. First of all, individuals with influence, talking heads, political operatives, commentators, dare I say some candidates, who knowingly disseminate disinformation for power, money, influence, what does that make them in the addiction framework? They're drug dealers. They're drug dealers. And the news organizations and groups that benefit from providing them a platform for disseminating disinformation are cartels. And the people who are always just seeking and consuming this drug of political outrage, well, they may just be addicted and they may need our help. This framework gives me an understanding of extremism. And I know that you're probably saying, Suzanne, wait a minute. Where's the hope in that? Addiction is really hard to recover from. To understand recovery, let's first talk about one aspect of addiction. And so, of course, before the pandemic, what did I do art about? Addiction. I went to 24 states and interviewed hundreds of people who were suffering from drug addiction. I returned to my Bethesda studio and created the Empathy and Yes, Empty Fix project. When I did interviews, I took pictures of my interviewees' eyes and affixed them to glass blocks. They go into fountains and reflecting pools because addiction is like drowning. One of my first interviews, though, happened in a Salt Lake City homeless shelter. A guy there, when I asked him naively, how did you become addicted? He looked at me with a weathering look and he said, Suzanne, it doesn't matter how I got into this circus tent, what door I came in, whether it was weed or oxy or whatever, that doesn't matter. He said, what matters is what's keeping me locked in here. He said, so don't ask how, ask why. I began in my interviews to ask why, and the answers were astonishing to me. Bullying, social isolation, neglect, abuse, all sorts of abuse. This was trauma that was lodged deep inside them. So I present their stories of trauma in a shipping container. At the entrance to the container is a sign that says, Americans spend over $1 billion a year on child safety items. Are we really keeping them safe? And as people walk through this tunnel of car seats, water wings, safety gates, they hear from 7 hidden audio speakers those stories of trauma. So, lesson number 3, we're at 3 already. Psychological injury makes some people highly vulnerable to addiction. So I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, come on, I made it through middle school, the lunchroom there, right? I'm fine. Well, in his book, The Myth of Normal, Dr. Gabor Mate notes that maybe. Okay, the clicker does not like me. There's my other hand. Okay. In his book, The Myth of Normal, Dr. Gabor Mate notes that societal or individual psychological stress, trauma, can cause certain people to become highly vulnerable to addictions of all sorts. But only if they have not had enough positive life experiences and positive influences to balance out the harm. I wanted to understand how this related to political extremism, so I contacted one of the world's leading experts on political obsession, Dr. Jocelyn Berlinger, and he explained to me that one pillar of radicalization is an all-consuming need for personal significance that crowds out other needs. Think about this. You've lost a job, you have financial pressures, you feel emasculated, you feel less than, you feel looked down upon. You can understand how extremism can happen. So let's talk about recovery, because we got to move on to hope. Actually dealing with this psychological trauma is the first of 3 critical elements in recovery from any addiction. You need counseling or therapy to really deal with that pain. Now, most people don't have access to or may refuse to go to therapy. Then just listen and provide them a gentle space to explore that pain within. A second important part of recovery is community. They have their community with them 24/7. It is on the TV all the time. But they really need a community that will help them separate from that extremist messaging, that will welcome them and let them know that they matter. And one thing that's important here, we do not have the luxury of ignoring political extremists any longer. They are too potent and destructive a force in America today. We have to do all we can to pull them back from the political edge. Self-concept. These are people whose political beliefs have become their image, their identity. We have to help them learn the other ways in which they matter. So, lesson 4 is recovery from addiction is possible. 2 points. Number 1, addiction is not a toggle switch. You're addicted, you're not addicted. Addiction is a continuum, and its severity can be judged by the harm that it causes. Number 2, recovery does not start with us shaming them because of the pathology of their behavior and making them acknowledge it. It begins with us laying the groundwork for them to recover. So how do we do this? Well, zone defense. First of all, you are only responsible for those people whom you feel you can reach out to or who you've erased from your contact list. Reconnect. And when you do, please do not talk politics. Challenging their beliefs undermines their self-worth, and that's what got them there in the first place. Instead, help them rediscover the kind, wonderful, warm, generous, smart, fun person who's hidden beneath the political veneer. Lastly, another opportunity. Set a shared goal. Become a pickleball team, plan a trip, plant a garden, do fantasy teams, do something that puts you on the same team, because that dissolves the othering. Now, why do we want to pathologize this behavior? We want to pathologize this behavior because we want political extremism to be uncool, right? We don't want our loved ones to be at the political extremes and be addicted. I will tell you, Leo Sprecher and I have teamed up with a New York City addiction therapist, and we're going to pilot an Extreme Anon family support group. That's one way to help pathologize the behavior and help individuals pull their loved ones back from the political edge. So, enacting a constitutional amendment it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of energy. So will making political extremism a rarity take the same kind of time and energy and empathy. But we will do it. I'm going to leave you with one glimmer of hope. Ozempic and Wegovy, the last 2 words you thought would come out of my mouth right now, right? Oh, you're laughing. You know where this is going, don't you? You know. These type 2 diabetes drugs that have been found to be wildly successful with weight loss, they work by influencing neurons in the brain's reward system. All right? That's how they work. And people who've been on these drugs for a while note a decrease in alcohol consumption. They're smoking less, they're gambling less. And last week, Axios reported that there are more and more, there's a growing list of conditions that will ultimately be treated by these drugs. This is based on a retrospective study of over 80,000 patients. Their alcohol use disorder, it was reduced by 50% or more, and so was its reoccurrence when they were on these drugs. So, I do not have stock in Novo Nordisk, promise, but I just want to leave you with the thought that, okay, it's me, folks, it's not the clicker. America may be slimming its way to a healthier